Hello, this is just going to be a very short video. I'm going to do it in English for a change, just to practice it, I guess. It's Powerlifting 101 and Introductory Ps. The reason for it is just I get a lot of questions from beginners thinking that I have something to offer them, which is not really the case. Whatever I do with my athletes are based on their expertise, what they bring to the table, because we're having a conversation where I'm not training them blindly. I listen to what they have to say, and it's based on experience. A beginner needs to do it differently. It's not about the program. That's the case in powerlifting. It's there's not a perfect program out there, and there's no need to really do something really complex for a beginner lifter. So it's just I just kind of had to think out loud what I would preferably answer a beginner asking me for advice. I don't think it's needed, so I'm going to try to talk about what a beginner athlete in powerlifting needs instead. Hopefully I have some good ideas about it, but right now I'm not working with a lot of beginning athletes in powerlifting, so I might not be the right person to talk about it. Okay, so let's start with the disclaimer. This information is going to be based on my personal experience and my opinions, and mine alone, with regards to what stands out as the most basic concepts of powerlifting. These statements are subjected to constant revision, not meaning that I'm going to post this again and again, but if you ask me, it will differ with time. So what I actually believe is the most useful advice for a beginner powerlifting athlete is going to change. And as always, this is opinions, and if you can't handle it, and the opinions will maybe differ from your own, maybe you should not consider watching this. And also, don't focus on what's not being addressed. This is just an introduction to a broader subject. I'm not going to give you the whole Powerlifting 101 exactly. I'm just going to outline what I mean is the most important thing for a beginning powerlifting, not how a powerlifting beginner should actually go about his introduction to powerlifting in detail. It's just a introduction. So what differentiate lifters of some merit and the very best? I started out talking about beginners, and this is just a basic 101 powerlifting. So why am I talking about the best lifters? And the reason for that is because any beginner in the sport have a dream of becoming a good lifter, and almost 99.99% of all powerlifters are amateurs, meaning that they don't actually live off it. They just have their dreams and their goals. So the ones who are trying powerlifting, if they do so on an early age, they probably have a dream of becoming a very good lifter. So even for the beginner, it's useful to talk about the best lifters. And powerlifting is a unique sport because the best lifters and the new beginners are actually training in the same on the same equipment, and they are training in the same gyms mostly. In my country, at least, the clubs are the places to be. We have the ones who are actually succeeding are pretty much from the bigger cities, because we have good clubs there where athletes are helping out each other. So it's a very short travel between the best lifters and the beginners. So we should talk about both in the same light. And the beginners are going to be able to use the best lifters as their guides early on. So that's unique, and that's something that I need to address here. But we can see that there are some difference between just good lifters and the very best. You see, the best lifters, the ones at the pinnacle of their sport, are the ones who are the most methodical about the way they perform the 3 competition lifts. And this is important. I'm not going to talk about anything else than the 3 competition lifts here. And I should really not address much anything else other than the 3 lifts. At least that should be my primary concern. And the best lifters should be primarily concerned with how they perform the 3 lifts. That's the key. And there's been a lot of research, new stuff, but what we're really doing with this is just kind of showing how the early pioneers of powerlifting were doing a lot of things right. They were focusing on building better benches, deadlifts, and squats, and they made some tools to get better at those, like, they did half squats, and they did half lifts and deadlift as well, and for the bench press they used pullovers and dumbbell work, stuff like that. Those are still important accessories, but they focused a lot on just a squat, just a bench, just a deadlift, and they're very methodical about it, and that's what the best lifters are doing. So a equipped lifter will work on his own suit, like suit it so it fits his or her proportions the best, and will work on getting the most out of the equipment, mostly year round. And this means having very tight equipment for most lifters. But at the very same time, the best equipped lifters are actually extremely strong raw as well, and they also accept the fact that strength without equipment is the driver, and it has to continue to rise. The carryover will be pretty much set, so there's only a limit to how much you can get. But the way they perform the lift, the way they move, where they place the bar, how they tuck their elbows, which is something shorter lifters do, for example, they do so also raw. So they're not concerned about having a weak raw bench, because they're using a technique that is better in a shirt. They don't concern themselves with that for the most part. They just want to lift as much in equipment. And the same goes for a raw lifter. They would not care how much they lift with a band, with the bar and the band, reverse band, or a 2 bench with the block, or without stopping on chest and stuff like that. And all lifters at a very high level, they don't care how much, they don't use these lifts to build muscles. So if they have big arms, delts, and pecs, of course muscle mass is important, but they don't perform the lifts to build more muscle per se. So that is also something that is important to keep in mind on when beginning powerlifting. It's not about doing bodybuilding. Of course, it's a byproduct. If you get a very strong squat, probably your legs will grow. And the same goes for a deadlift. If you can pull 300 kilos, 600 pounds, you're gonna have a really wide and thick back as a result of that. But it's all about maximizing performance on the platform. Of course, this is kind of like everybody knows this, but it's important to mention, and it's important to mention that we don't care how many centimeters we lift. We try to maximize performance. So really, if you can shorten your stride in the bench press, for example, by arching up, you'll do it. You should do it. You should focus on that. That's important. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about programming details, but this is kind of the reason why I wanted to just throw this out there, this opinion piece. The basic is you don't have to worry too much about it. Not in the beginning stages. It's not about setting a percentage of your max or doing reps in reserve or RPEs. That doesn't matter early on. Not really. You can use the same weight for 3 weeks if you can perform it a little bit deeper with your knees better tracking your toes, and you're more able to create that intra-abdominal pressure if you can do that with the same weight for 3 weeks in a row, and you continue getting better on the timing. Like you spend a little bit more time on eccentric, a little less time on a concentric, for example. That's a much more important value for you to program after. It doesn't have to be 90% of your max. It doesn't have to be RP 8s and above. You can use RP 6 3 weeks in a row, but if you are able to squat deeper in week 3 with a better aligned spine, that's the programming variable you're looking at. And I get questions from beginners, and they kind of look up to experienced coaches, but I have very little to offer that anyone else can offer. And the absolute key for a beginner is to actually be part of an environment of other like-minded people. And by that, I mean experienced lifters. You should get in touch with experienced lifters. Powerlifting is not a solo sport as far as I'm concerned. You need more experienced people around you, and you need lifters who have actually competed. Those are the ones who are going to guide you. Not in terms of how you should lift technically, but the mindset. And when you're around these athletes, they are very methodical. Like I mentioned before, they do things very similar from time to time. And you'll see that the very best are focusing on squat, bench, and deadlifts. There's no secret. It's just hard work. Do squats, do benches, do deadlifts. And being in a club, you'll see that there's no gimmicks. Powerlifting is about those 3 lifts. So you should really strive to get in touch with a powerlifting club, get involved with it, and train together with better powerlifters than yourself. So these are the athletes who have done the work, and this is a solo sport on the platform. So the best lifters are always bright minds in terms of telling you how a squat should feel and look, bench should feel and look, and deadlift should feel and look. But when you're in these clubs, you'll see that they are actually not spending a lot of time outside the gym doing other things than squat, bench, and deadlift. This is their passion. So I have to say this again and again, but powerlifting is basic. It's very, very basic. The lifts can be perfected by almost anyone, but you have to work on it. And it's like learning a new language. You have to learn how to break down the words, how to build up the sentences. There's a lot of things that goes into it. But focus on these 3 movements, and you have to perform them perfectly. You have to have somebody watching over you. It doesn't matter if you're using Shike or some other good program, or you're using RPs and stuff like that. It doesn't matter for a beginner. It will not, you leave that stuff for later. Get a coach later on. The most important thing is being in that environment of good powerlifters who've done squats with heavy loads. And they will be able to tell you how you should lift, or they will guide you in that process of figuring out how you should lift. Because it's not about learning on the internet how to lift, because for you, a squat might look a little bit different than your idols. But this is something you'll learn if you train with experienced powerlifters. But I guess what I'll sum it up with is that the key is to be part of an environment with other lifters who are doing powerlifting. Not crossfitting, not strongman, not anything else, but powerlifting. Because it's basic movements, and you have to perfect them. If you want to get anywhere close to successful, perfect those 3 lifts. Spend all your time doing that in the beginning. Again, programming. It says programming. This is not numbers. This is not sets and reps. Nothing like that. But I have to mention this again. The first thing you'll notice is how many common features you'll find amongst experienced athletes. They have a methodical approach to the way they set up before a lift. The way they tighten their belt and anything. The amount of steps they take back out of the squat rack. The way the back and feet are set on the bench press. the way they grip the bar in the deadlift, and how they breathe while working out throughout the set. So there is a lot of common features. Not all lifters look the same, but there is a method to what they're doing. And all of these lifters have done these routines over and over again, and they will be able to guide you through your questions. This is more important than looking online for a exotic program. It's more important to just listen to these lifters. Let them tell you why they're doing stuff, and you'll figure out what you need to do, because we're all built a little bit differently. So how you grip the bar in terms of width in a squat, for example, or how high or how low it will be in the back, that's an individual thing, but you have to realize that they have worked through this thousands of times and have tried a lot of different things, but it's a method. It means that a lot of your training is going to be about technical mastery, and that's not something you can find in a program online. It's not about exercises of different variations. It's about your mindset when going into a powerlifting club. You have to evolve yourself, get involved with squatting. What is a squat all about? It's not about the shoes you wear, not about the belt, not about how you grip the bar. It's more nuanced than that. But this is something you'll only learn in a powerlifting club, as far as I'm concerned. Of course, you can shop online for a very good coach and have him track you very closely, but being a part of a club and having your fellow members of that club help you out with these things, I think that is more rewarding in the end. And if you achieve something, of course you should hire a coach. Do that on a later stage. Again, it says programming. It's very little programming, but I'll give you some few hints about what I think you should focus on. You should be wary of any powerlifting program that contains a lot of work unrelated to the competition lifts. And I mean body composition stuff, conditioning stuff, mobility, rehab, stuff like that. Don't have too much of that in the beginning. You don't really need it. And before you've mastered the competition lifts, very little else will get you that progress up to that high level. A technical mastery. You should spend a lot of time squatting. It's boring. Do it at the same time. Make sure you feel right about it. You're not going to try to look like your idol. You're going to try to look like the best version of yourself. Your squat will be different than his and her squats. The variation you need should be accurately addressed. So if you're picking up a program online with a lot of different exercises, the chances are these are not going to fit you perfectly. And like I said, it's not going to bring you technical mastery. Not necessarily. But we have a few examples, of course, of acceptable variation. A beginner would normally start with block pulls for deadlift. In this case, an athlete are not able to get down to the ground with the back aligned properly. So start with block pulls, perfectly valid as a start, and you'll get mobility from that. You'll be able to get into a position when you just start with block pulls and you work your way down to the ground. You'll gradually build the mobility you need. That's how it works. Your body will adapt to whatever stress you put on it. Of course, if you experience pain and stuff like that, by just simply hinging backwards or forwards or sideways, you have to get it checked out. But normally, you just need block pulls to be able to pull from the ground eventually. You'll work 3 or 4 weeks, taking off little by little. I would usually spend 3 weeks on the same block height, adding a bit of load, not much, but maybe just adding volume a little bit and a little bit of speed, and then going with the same weight and a little bit of less block height. So that's a perfectly acceptable variation. Another example, more like a progressive warm-up or dynamic warm-up. Squat to stand, perfectly sane, rational exercise to have in a program for a beginner, or a goblet squat or overhead squat, or maybe a squat against the wall. This is perfectly normal in a beginner program. 2 to 3 of these different variations for squatting, and 2 to 3 variation for benching, and the same for deadlift as a warm-up, perfectly acceptable. I would say that your warm-up could easily be like 30 to 40% of the time you're using in the first couple of weeks. Perfectly acceptable. But you have to accept that the best powerlifters are able to spend more time doing squat, bench, deadlift than dynamic warm-ups. This is not the secret. If you're lifting with a technique that is destroying you, you have to consider the possibility that you're simply overworking it. You're simply doing too many squats per week. So I'm not going to dwell on that. Now, let's see, I've spent already 20 minutes now. I'm going to try to speed it up a little bit. I've touched on this earlier. Powerlifts are simple, but only once you know how you should perform them. And this is, if we're going to go into the details of it and the research, it's going to be more difficult. But I would say that it's you should feel. You should get a feel for whatever squat you can perform, and you should get a feel for whatever deadlift you can perform. I think this is going to be something that you can feel for yourself a little bit. How wide you should stand, stuff like that. It's not really a theoretical concept. It's more something that you learn about yourself. It's not necessarily something that you need to read in a PubMed article. You don't have to know about how your hip joint is different on your right and left leg. I think that this is something that you could be able to feel yourself. But the powerlifts are simple, and success in powerlifting is built solely on your ability to perform them over time. I'd say that, and I mean year after year. There are no quick fixes, and proficiency in squat, bench, and deadlift take time. And if you want to be at the top in powerlifting, you have to do a squat that your body allows you to do year after year. So you can't copy whatever lifter you want to copy. You have to just make sure that you're doing a squat that feels safe for you, that is not destroying you, because you're going to have to do this for a very long time. And you're going to have to do whatever technique you can do with high efficiency. And that means a consistent bar path through a shorter range of motion, relatively speaking. Some will have shorter strides than others. That's just a difference, individual difference there. So, but maximizing or minimizing the range of motion is as far as you can is certainly part of your job as a beginner. So let's talk a little bit about what we can introduce to someone new to powerlifting. Something that I feel might stand out as being universally true. I've said this before in this presentation, but you have to get to work on the actual lifts and focus your efforts there. I'm talking 80 to 20. 80% of your time spent on squat, bench, deadlift. This is your bread and butter. And of course, we have somebody who needs to get their general form, physical capacity better, and maybe they have to lose some fat. Powerlifting is not about getting as big as possible. It's about accumulating muscle mass, and that muscle mass should be fine-tuned to perform the lifts in the way that you generally do them. But of course, there are somebody who needs to get more fit, and somebody needs to lose some weight before they can be a better powerlifter. And this is something you can work on in parallel, and at times this will of course take up more of your effort. But if we are in generally good shape, we have a reasonable fat percentage, then we're talking about progressive overload. over time. That's the key. We can maybe put in some details there, but I'm not going to go into massive details. But as a little framework, or how you should progress, range of motion, you should start a smaller amplitude, work your way to bigger amplitude. This is something I think many agree on. You can still do a squat even if you bend your knees only to 90 degrees. It's still a squat. You still learn a lot from it, and if that's what you're comfortable with, then start there and go slow and go a little bit faster. That's the second point, speed of movement. So you should try to move faster and faster concentrically over time. And load is, we load up a short, maybe I don't focus too much on loading up shorter ranges of motion. For those, I try to just go faster and then increase the range of motion. So I try to use load once the lifter is proficient in a acceptable competition squat, acceptable bench, acceptable deadlift. Then I can load it up. And use speed as a predictor of the load, really. But with the load, you should reach a technical breaking point. So you should really see that something is kind of starting to happen, like you're starting to buckling in your back. That's kind of your warm-ups, your pyramid. You're just doing like 6 and 5 and 4 and 3 and 2 and 1 rep on your way up, and you should try to get to that point where you kind of break down in form, and your work sets are just going to be slightly less load and more reps, of course. And there's nobody have to do 12 and 10 reps. If you're a beginner, you can do triples. It's just not going to be triples at RP 8 and 9. It's going to be triples at RP 5, and you're just going to do more sets of it. You can do supersets and you can do short rest intervals. That's a good tip for a beginner. Another kind of some finer details. If undertrained, if you were gassing heavily for just sets of 5, and we're talking about really RPE weights that are not heavy, RP 5, 6, 7, then you should introduce an aerobic foundation. This could be really light sets of 10 to 12 and 15 reps, and this could be, of course, with lunges or leg presses or Bulgarian split squats or whatever sled work, high intensity intervals, or you can add a couple of brisk walking sessions 2 to 3 times a week. That could be a start. And if ones are uncoordinated, which really is something that you see a lot in beginners, and we think it's mobility, but it's really just coordination and just being acquainted with positions, then you can use elastic bands or just try to get them into whatever pattern that it resembles a squat, bench, and deadlift. That would be appropriate. So you can use like elastic bands and hold on to stuff, or place your arms straight in front of you, stuff like that. That's perfectly acceptable. Yeah, and this is I'm not getting into any type of programming details here, but progressive overload, it's mentioned before, but it's hard to beat from an early stage. But you're not using it to the truest sense. You're leaving more reps in a tank, and you set a goal that is well within capabilities, and then you just get cracking. So you don't test 1RMs for a beginner, not necessarily. You just get quality set in for whatever ROM you've chosen for 3 to 4 weeks to work on, and you add some sets, maybe kilos, like 4 weeks before you change it up. And here I'm talking about adding speed. That's basically what you're doing. You're adding a little bit of work in terms of more sets, and you're doing it with more confidence concentrically. You're just speeding it up. So you might start with 40 kilos in a half squat, 8 reps, easy. And next week you're doing 2 to 3 sets. And it might be RPE 6 the second week, even if it was 7 the first week. That's okay. you add a little bit of speed. The technique should be, there should be more confidence there. The workouts should be stressed, and the creating of intra-abdominal pressure. Those types of things should get progressively better. And after 3 to 4 weeks of that, you should be able to use a lower box in a squat and deadlift. Maybe the same for a bench press. Everybody might not be able to reach the chest, but you should maybe start with a box or bench press to a block in the beginning. Finally, we've come to the last one. I had no idea I would spend half an hour talking about this. This is just basic ideas, so nothing heavy. And that was actually it. That was the introduction. I'll try to sum it up a little bit. The most important thing for me is being a part of a powerlifting camp, meaning just a club, or training with powerlifters who've done this before. I think in our sports, coaches are, of course, important, but whenever I train in a powerlifting gym and there are like 3 or 4 or 5 plus lifters who are at the same level or same age group, they just fire each other up so much. And it's so important for powerlifters to get together like that. So don't think that you have to do it on your own, and try to get a group together. If you can learn from an experienced lifter, do it. And if you're training alone, you should tape your lifts and have somebody look at them. And this will be a good for experienced lifter to actually tape lifts and have someone comment on it. And this is kind of important as well. You should not be afraid to use basic overload principles, along with, of course, a very focused attention to technical mastery, which means that you don't need a very hefty advanced program with a lot of periodization models in it. You just need to start with a range of motion you can handle and increase it over time, and try to get confident in exploding out of the hole in a squat. Like, you should be strong in the concentric part of it and control it in the eccentric. And I think I'm going to leave it at that. I've tried to sum it up a little bit on my way here. So I would just end up by saying best of luck to you, and hope to hear some comments on this to see if anybody agrees. So thanks.